Okay, one more.
So we looked at the, as a company, we looked at the people like NBS and the either hosting or doing it yourself option.
Yep.
And a couple of things that concern us about paying somebody to host our models is one is we're still not seeing a lot of demand or take up, or at the time we weren't seeing a lot of demand BIM models from our consultants. And two, which is where this thing here is really important, the models that exist, we looked at those models and thought they're not suitable for FIA products.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought, why invest a lot of money on something that's not suitable, you're not sure to take up, without getting our trade association involved first, and to ensure that we're providing as a trade suitable models.
Okay. Well, I guess a number of comments. The first one is, in a sense, you kind of have to look at the background to the different suppliers, like BIM Store, us, and National BIM Library. National BIM Library is part of Reba Enterprises, it's part of Reba. BIM Store is owned by Space Architects. So both of them have a very strong architectural heritage. Does that necessarily mean that they have an understanding and skills in other areas? You be the judge of that. Certainly in terms of the creation of objects, you'll find that certainly the major engineering consultancies, they are absolutely stuffed full of people that can create objects. The problem is that they have no control over them. You'll find that if you go to, I don't know, name somebody, if you go to Mott MacDonald, you'll find that they've got an object that represents something, let's say a boiler for argument's sake, and they've probably got, for that particular boiler, they've probably got 20, maybe 30, 40 different variations of that particular boiler scattered around their organisation because an individual has needed one at a particular moment in time. There hasn't been an object available, so they've created their own, just as a placeholder. And the placeholder is there, it sits in the model, it does the job that's required because they can attach data to it. The fact that the guy 3 seats away is working on a different project, but it requires the same boiler, there's no communication, so they have no way of controlling that today. So I'm not surprised that, particularly in the specialisms that your products are in, that there aren't very many objects today, but that will come. The objects that exist today have largely been self-made by those people that need to do that design today. And they're pretty ineffective in the sense of what I've just described, because what will happen, of course, is that designer will go back and reuse the object they used last time in the next project, but I've got absolutely no idea whether the data's been updated or whether the model still exists, etc. That kind of comes out later on. So, we're not going to get to a better world unless we can kind of change the way that people work and the habits that they have, and also provide the right information for them in the first place. As I said earlier, we're all creatures of habit. We will do the thing that is easiest for us. If you make it easy for people and you give them a better user experience than they've currently got, they'll use it. Oh, another question.
Yeah, one question from the side. It's an issue of security.
Yep.
So a company now has a BIM model and gain access to information that wasn't intended as such, but could be used or such like or breaking.
Yep. Okay. I went to a presentation at a conference last March of last year. And there were 2 guys on the stage at the time talking about, or one of the presentations was about security and BIM. And the one guy, I'm sure he was from the Secret Service. He was the most scary presenter I've ever seen. He really was quite frightening in terms of both his demeanour. He wasn't engaging at all. He was very aggressive. And he was also very combative in terms of trying to get people to pull back from putting too much data into BIM models for the very reason that you've described. In his particular instance, he was describing the way that they could pick up terrorists today in terms of, by scanning CCTV and seeing particular habits in terms of the way that people move around buildings, etc. And he was saying, of course, in the BIM world, all of that intelligence that we can gather today is completely lost. Because if you can get hold of a BIM model, you don't have to go anywhere near the building. You can plan how you're going to enter it, what you're going to do, and how to exit without ever having been anywhere near the building. So he was quite a scary individual. But the reason that presentation was on was that there is the way that the framework of data is being put together is through a number of publicly available specifications called PAS 1192. And one of the specification subsets, which came out in the middle of last year, is PAS 1192 Part 5, BIM Security. So to answer your question, I'd suggest you read that. But you're quite right. I mean, you know, what we have to recognise is that some of this data, first of all, it's not all intended to be in the public domain, you know, but somewhere or other this data exists in the real world today, whether it's in a 2D diagram that's locked up in an installer's drawer or somewhere else. Now, those sorts of things, particularly in secure buildings, and you know, as I said earlier, I've worked on some of the MOJ stuff, and they're particularly pernickety about you know, providing plans for instance, prison layouts and those sorts of things. So you have to use some sense here in terms of what's reasonable to provide and to whom, and what's the purpose of providing it. You know, I can't answer that. It'll have to happen on a project-by-project basis. Okay, oh, sorry, one more.